I was looking for somebody to play the Hulk. We talked to Arnold Schwarzenegger. He was busy doing Conan at the time, and he suggested we talk to Louis Ferrigno. And I met with Louis, and he was a very sweet guy, had absolutely no acting experience at all. You know, and I was concerned about being able to make that happen. So I sort of kept Lou in my hip pocket, but I decided to try to go with Richard Kiel, who later on would play Jaws in the James Bond movie. Dick is 7'5", is massive, and is an actor. And we actually filmed a week with Dick, but as we sat in the dailies, more and more it just became apparent that this was not the right image for the Hulk.
It was someone who had the height, but not the bulk and not the presence. Tall and thin just didn't cut it. And lumbering. It was just too much like, you know, the Abominable Snowman.
My daughter, who was about 7 at the time or so, Kenny asked if I'd bring her to the rushes, the dailies. And he showed film of Lou as the Hulk and someone else. And he wanted her opinion. And she liked Lou better. I don't know. I'm sure that's not the only reason he got the job.
Lou didn't have the height, but Lou had the bulk. And Lou had the eyes. He had very sweet eyes, even though we had to put white contacts in them. And he had a gentleness about him. So you paint him green and you put on the prosthesis and you do all that stuff, but there's still a quality that comes through from him.
I went back to Lou and I brought him in and we did some improvisation stuff together to try to see if I could get a performance out of him. And he did okay. Not great, but okay. But Louis was an impassioned guy that I felt had the inside stuff to make it happen. I mean, here's a kid that had made himself into this, you know, hugely amazing muscle man. And I got to thinking, well, if he's got the inner strength and fortitude and passion to do that, then I bet I can make this work. And there are some scenes in the Hulk that still choke me up. And Lou did a really, really wonderful job and got better and better as the show went on.
I don't think at the time I appreciated what a tough gig it was for Lou. That must have been really hard, you know, to come out, you know, with the ripped jeans and with the crazy wig.
I wouldn't want to be painted in that green makeup every time he came. I mean, it was a chore.
The contacts, I think, were difficult for both of them. I mean, he had to wear his for much longer. Bixby could wear his for a shot and take him out.
In those days, contact lenses were technologically primitive and really tough to wear, and they had the color to them.
Lou, for some reason, either it didn't bother him that much or he suffered in silence.
When he was walking around being Lou, people would talk to him. When he was made up as the Hulk, they wouldn't talk to him. He didn't seem human in a way. So that bothered him because he spent the entire day in makeup and felt invisible in a lot of ways, felt that, you know, he was treated as though he couldn't understand and he couldn't communicate. And it wasn't intentional, but I don't think he was wrong. I don't think he was wrong to feel that way. I think there was a sense of, how can you communicate with him? He's green and he's huge.
We went down to the desert in Brawley, but it was August in the desert. And it was a fascinating experience for all of us. It was 120 degrees. The sand temperature was 160 degrees. And because of the heat, Lou's makeup kept separating. Instead of being green, he'd be blue and yellow. It was in streaks. He was like this little rainbow of blue and yellow. And what the makeup people would have to do is just before we would shoot each take, they'd have to run in and rub him down real quick to smear the blue and the yellow back together. And that would make green just long enough for us to take the shot.
Lou had expressed, at least to me, that he really wanted to try acting. You know, not just be an action-type actor.
Lou began to get the bug of he wanted to do a speaking role. The challenge with Lou was that he was mostly deaf. I mean, he was hard of hearing, but it was beyond hard of hearing. It was a condition from childhood. It was obvious that the way to best serve him so that he could come off as good as possible was to make the role as close to his own life. I wrote King of the Beach, and it was very, very satisfying for me because I knew that I was touching something important to him. He came in to me after he'd read the script, and he was in tears, and he said, "It's like you're inside my head." There was a scene in a locker room where he talks to David Banner.
If I go through with the competition, South Diamond will own me.
But only as a professional bodybuilder.
It was really lovely, and I'm very, very proud of it, and I was proud of him.
When I was doing The Bionic Woman, I did a show called Return of Bigfoot, and I found Ted Cassidy, who was a wonderful actor, and I went to Ted and I said, would you do the voice for me of the Incredible Hulk? I needed a deep voice, and on the dubbing stage, we made it even deeper by changing the pitch so that it went even lower than Ted. And at the same time, I said, Ted, would you narrate the main title for me as well?
Dr. David Banner, physician, scientist, searching for a way to tap into the hidden strengths that all humans have.
Then, unfortunately, when Ted was 46 in 1979, he died. And I remember them asking, do you still want his voice in the main title? And I said, absolutely, don't change it. And we kept it throughout the run of the series. And my friend Charlie Napier, who is an actor whose face you would recognize in an instant, a wonderful character actor who's also got a very deep voice, Charlie came in and did the Hulk for me after that.
I know my daughter, as a child watcher, she couldn't wait to see the Hulk out. I mean, every week, that's what she wanted to see. And she always wanted to know. She would get so involved in it, why didn't the underpants rip?
The metamorphoses that we had to do from Bix to Lou were frustrating. Frustrating because in those days we didn't have the computer morphing technology that we have now.
Every week it was like, okay, how is he? We got to figure out 2 Hulk outs every week for 22 episodes. Sometimes I got a little silly trying to, come up with the Hulk outs to make them work. And also, they had to be clever, they had to be creative, they had to be story relevant.
There was a list in everybody's office of possible Hulk outs, and I remember that became an obsession, is thinking of Hulk outs that would fit in stories. And sometimes you would get an idea for a Hulk out and build, then build the characters around that.
I once came up with an idea out of desperation. We'll put Bill Bixby on skis, and he's skiing down a slope, and he's gonna hit a tree, and he hulks out. Well, it's before computer graphics and whatever, and it's like, I don't know how we shoot it, but it's an idea. Obviously, it was never done.
The transitions into the Hulk, of course, began with the white eyes. And I came up with that trigger effect because I wanted to be able to have a place where the audience knew they were at a point of no return. Once the audience saw the white eyes, we knew there was no going back to Dr. David Banner. The Hulk was about to come out the other side. And part of the reason I did that was because it gave me the dramatic ability to see the white eyes and then to have Bixby get thrown in a closet. And we knew who was coming out of the closet, but we didn't have to see the whole transition. There were other times when we wanted to see the physical transformation from small, meek Bix into great, big, beefy Lou. We tried all kinds of different things, and finally I said, look, I think the thing to do is just to get shirts that are too small for Lou and squeeze them tight on his back, weaken the fabric, so that as Lou tightened up, we could make that rip go up his back. And then we would look for different ways to do it. I remember throwing challenges to the associate producers and the insert crews where we'd write things like, his feet expands out of his shoes. Well, how do I do that? I'd go, I don't know, you figure it out. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. So the transformations were something that the audience always watched for, but which we as creators always tried to duck as much as we could, because really I just knew that I couldn't do them as well as I'd like to. I mean, nowadays, of course, with CGI and morphing technology, it would be so easy to do it. I was very lucky to have a wonderful writing staff working with me. Jim Perriott was my producer on the first season of The Hulk, and then Nick Correa and Jim Hirsch after that. And then two ladies who wrote their very first script for anybody on The Hulk, Karen Harris and Jill Sherman.
I was working as an associate producer in public television and on a PA and freelancing and also typing scripts for $5 an hour in between my freelance assignments to pay the rent. Jill was working as a journalist. She also reviewed movies.
Karen knew someone at Universal, and we got an interview with Ken Johnson as they were looking for new blood, and we were green new blood, and Ken was nice enough to give us a shot.
So we wrote The Beast Within as our very first paid-for script. It was our entree to writing. It was the door that opened.
It was a wonderful opportunity to see a writer grow and help the show grow and bring new ideas to us. That's the thing we're always looking for in episodic. What can we do that's new? You're always looking for a spark of an idea that you can take and run with as far as the show's concerned.
It was my first mainstream job. I had spent my early 20s playing piano in bars at night and tarring roofs and raising babies, and I had a couple of scripts optioned by majors and not made, and my agent, he had given one of those option scripts to the producers of The Hulk, specifically Nick Correa, who was just a wonderful writer and a wonderful human being. He was my champion, and he went to Kenny, and Kenny read me as well, and Kenny told Nick, go ahead. And from there, I was thrust into the joys and rigors and fun and camaraderie of everyday production.
Bob Steinhauer had been my second assistant director on The Bionic Woman. I moved him to unit production manager on The Hulk, and then to producer, and then ultimately to supervising producer.
Kenny got a crew together, and it didn't happen overnight, of people who thought differently, who felt things differently, who visually saw things differently. But yet, we somehow all kind of bonded together in this one thing. And the majority of us stayed with the show the entire time.
When you have a crew that's in sync with each other, knows each other's strengths and weaknesses, and are all pulling towards a common goal, then they will get things done. And that's what that crew was. And it was a crew that genuinely liked each other. As story editor, I was on the set quite frequently making changes, making cuts, either for production or for artistic reasons. And everyone adapted very, very easily. We all were endowed with a lot of freedom to put our own voices into the one common voice of the show.
There was another factor that was also really important for the Hulk's success, and that was the visual look of it. I didn't want it to look like normal Universal television fare. I wanted it to have a real cinematic quality. And I looked at a lot of work from a lot of directors of photography. So I was lucky enough to find a young guy named John McPherson, who had been a lighting designer, lighting technician, a gaffer, for 13 years, and really came to cinematography from the standpoint of light. I remember when John first came in to interview with me, most people come in sort of bright and cheery to, try to get a job. And John was sitting in this sort of fetal position in this chair in my office, all curled up, and he was going, "Oh, Kenny, I'm an artist. I paint with light." And I went, "Oh, okay." I said, "This guy is too neurotic not to hire." And Johnny and I became fast friends immediately. And I think that's part of the reason that the show was successful, was because it had a look that really differentiated it from so many other shows that were on the air then. My friend Stephen Bochco introduced me to Harv Bennett, who was producing a show called The $6 Million Man. Harv convinced me that in television, it was the producer that controlled the whole medium. The producer hired the writer, the producer hired the director. I said, "Stop, I'll take the job." Because I could then immediately hire myself to write and direct, which is what I did.
Kenny is really one of the most incredible directors that I've ever run into. A man who is so familiar and comfortable with the grammar of film, and also related so well to actors, and had such a great sense of storytelling. He's just truly a great artist.
And when he directed, no one said we can't do it, not out of fear, but out of respect. He wanted it. Somehow, we had to make it work, and we did. Just because he made us all feel very, very comfortable.
I can't think of any shows that I don't think of him as directing and having a very pleasant way of making sure that his eye and his voice was gently overriding the machine.
Universal had released my pilot of The Incredible Hulk overseas as a theatrical motion picture. And I got a call from them one day saying, "Congratulations, you have the top grossing motion picture in Europe." I said, "What are you talking about?" And they said, "All over Europe, The Incredible Hulk is the #1 movie in the box office." And so a year later, they released Married as the bride of The Incredible Hulk, not my title, and it did very, very well also. The Hulk around the world has been a phenomenal success. I get emails from people literally everywhere who write in about how they've been touched by it.
I do remember that Nick Correa was in line at a restaurant and the reservations were backed up. And we had just started and someone was in the line saying, "If they don't call my name soon, I'm going to Hulk out." And he said, "We're going to be a hit." It had become part of the lexicon at that time. So it must have been relatable because people are still saying that. I say it occasionally.
I think it has to do, I know it's going to sound corny, but with the humanity of the show and the problems that were addressed in the 80s on that show were problems that were universal, and they're still problematic today in many people's lives.
Ken Johnson had a philosophy from day one that we should always never speak down to the audience, never write down to the audience, never think that you're writing a comic book. Write drama, write real stories, write real people. And that was the basis for the show, and those were our marching orders.
The music in the Hulk, they were a cue for the audience. The audience could anticipate when a Hulk out was going to happen, when we were going to turn away from the action and go into plot, story, character. The music kind of got the audience ready for what was coming.
Helicopters really eat up a soundtrack. And so to have music going while helicopters are going is very difficult because the music usually gets swallowed. And I said to Joe Harnell, who was my composer, "Joe, you know what? Let's synthesize the sound of a helicopter blade. And let's make that, we'll use that instead of the helicopter sound effect. And you can make it in sync with the music so that the rhythm of the helicopter blade is also the rhythm of the music that we're doing, and we can balance it, everything." And Joe said, "What a great idea." He loved it because it would protect his music. And indeed, that's what we ended up doing. And if you listen carefully at the end of part 1 of Prometheus, you can hear that helicopter blade and how it's absolutely in sync with the music. It's because it's part of the music. In those days, most every Universal show ended with a big, rousing, orchestral conclusion. And Joe Harnell said, "Is that what you want for this?" And I said, "No." I said, "This is a lonely man by himself. It ought to be a piece of music that is as poignant as we can make it without getting sappy, and that really plays into the pathos of this character." And so I said, "Joe, it ought to be a solo piano at the end of the pilot and at the end of every episode." And that's indeed what we did.
Joe Harnell's theme was touching because it really embodied the loneliness of David Banner so well. It was so poignant. The theme is deceptive in its simplicity. It's those 4 notes.
People know it. I mean, it became really recognizable. I understand that for a minute there were like lyrics to it, but I can't. We used to make up our own lyrics. I think it was, "I am the Hulk. I rip my clothes off." I mean, it's like that was the first 2 lines. And we used to sit there in post-production and just make up our own lyrics to the music. We loved it. It never failed to give you goosebumps. It never failed, and that was one of the things that you could count on is at the end, he was going to be alone again. And it just was beautiful. Joe did a great job.
The music is one of the things that people mention to me most often about when they think about the Hulk and what drew them to it was the sadness that they felt for this wonderful, lovable, accessible character played by Bix, underscored by that simple musical piece that Joe wrote for it. And it's really sort of been a seminal experience in the lives of a lot of people who saw the show for the entire length of it.
I don't remember an event or whether the ratings were terrible or why we were canceled. I just remember that it ended.
I look back and isn't that funny? I just think of it as this fabulous 5 years, and I certainly remember the beginning, but I don't remember how it went down.
Well, as I remember it, we were good. No one thought it was going to be over. And then we got word the show was canceled.
The cancellation of the show did come as a surprise. There was a fellow named Harvey Shepard who ran CBS for about 20 minutes, but in that 20 minutes, Harvey decided that the Hulk was getting tired. I don't know why he decided that, because the ratings were still good.
So if there was something going on, I was not aware of it. And I don't think any of us really were. I don't think Universal was.
We had 7 shows in the can that we had not yet aired, and I said, Harvey, buy 6 more and you'll have a half a season. And that's 13 episodes, you'll really give it a run, let's see. And I said, besides, I got a great idea for opening the 5th season. I said, I want to do a show where David Banner's sister, whom we had set up in one of the earlier episodes, is dying of a congenital blood disease. And the only thing that can save her is a transfusion from a sibling. Now, what happens when Hulk blood gets into somebody else? And I said, and I'm telling you, America will tune in droves. And no, he didn't think that was going to do much of anything. I was also frustrated because it didn't give us the opportunity to bring the show to a conclusion, which so many people write me about and have asked me about over the years. What would you have done? And there was no final show written. The lost episode does not exist anywhere. There was certainly an idea in my head to bring the series to a satisfactory psychological conclusion for the character of Dr. David Banner. It was important for me that he got to the end of his quest, that he found a cure, essentially. And unfortunately, because we were just summarily shuffled off, we never had the chance to do that final episode, which I think was a shame in a lot of ways.
By accidentally ending open-ended was sort of a nice metaphor for his anger. But yes, I do wish we could have written an episode that had a bit of closure to it.
I would have liked to have seen it go and end. And it's unfortunate it didn't, you know. And I think, you know, the loyal fans of the show, they got cheated, I think. But not because of us.
I don't know that there would be a good way to end it. I think the ending is he's walking off all by himself, just like always. And you know that those stories continue to go on after we're off the air, that he's still out there looking for his cure.
After the Hulk ended, I would read in the trades many times, it seemed for 20 years, that there was always a mention of a Hulk movie. And the great director Ang Lee finally directed it.
I know that Gale Ann Hurd had been trying to get the movie made for about a dozen years. There had been about 10 or 11 different writers on it. One of them called me after the movie opened and said, I just wanted you to know that in all the screenings that I have been in, after all the writers that have worked on this show, the only line that gets a rise out of the audience is, "No le gustaría verme enojado." So I was flattered.
I'm stunned in the turnaround of Hollywood now that they are. I mean, it used to be 30 years between you remaking a movie, and now they're remaking The Hulk with Ed Norton. If it weren't for Ken and Bixby, that I don't think we'd be contemplating a remake of the movie. And I think that the TV show is pivotal to the legs that it has.
Told you I'd make it.
We're all gonna make it.
Just by virtue of the medium that television really brought it into everyone's everyday life.
My greatest memory is being in that room for the first time with all of them and being scared out of my mind and having 6 or 7 people really make me feel, you know what, we don't know you really yet, and we don't know who you are, but we're going to give you a chance. That's my greatest memory.
It was the beginning of my adult life. I was 28, and everything in my life as an adult started then and came out of that. I look back with great fondness. I call it my college years, you know. Met the great love of my life on the set. I found a career through Kenny. Looking back, I treasure every single day, and it's my favorite credit.
I do know that we all spend a lot of time, I've told Kenny this, what we call chasing the experience, that you remember it as so lovely. Even the tough times, even the hard times and the fights and all of that and the misunderstandings, you remember it as such a special time and that you never duplicate it again.
Looking back on The Hulk, it's very interesting because it was not a project that I had wanted to do to begin with. I didn't see it as being something I could do and do well with my heart in it. But once I hit on the idea, thanks to my wife Susie, of incorporating a little bit of Victor Hugo's Les Miserables, a little bit of Robert Louis Stevenson's Jekyll and Hyde, and I really saw that there was a way into it to mine the human condition and to do stories that were about what it was like to be cursed with something like this. I knew I was on the right track. Once I was lucky enough to get Bill Bixby to come on board to play the character that I had created, and for him to be supported by people like Louis Ferrigno and Jack Colvin and all the wonderful actors whom we worked with over the 5 years that we did the show, to be able to work with crew people like my cinematographer John McPherson, like Claude Riggins, my sound man, to be able to have such wonderful, talented people behind the scenes like my editors, George Ohanian, Bob Richards, Alan Marks, and Jack Schoengarth. The hundreds and hundreds of people that worked on The Hulk have to share in the success of it with me. And it is something that I look back on very, very fondly because we did some really extraordinary work. It's very hard to do an episodic television series and have every single episode be as good as it possibly can be. Certainly you have some that are just not as good no matter how hard you work. But for the most part, our batting average was really good. And it was because of the team that I had been lucky enough to put together, particularly the writing and the producing team that worked with me over the years. All of those men and women who brought all of their talents to The Hulk are the reason that it was so successful, and the reason that I can now look back at it with such fondness and such gratitude and such joy at having been a part of it.
I don't know. Somehow, something about the whole thing just doesn't seem right.
Mr. McGee, the man you're looking for, this Dr. Banner, is dead, right? Burned to death?
As we ended season 2, we were rolling along very well in the ratings, and we knew pretty well that we were going to get a pickup for season 3, which we did. So we went into season 3 with a sense of what could we do that was going to build off of everything that we'd done already, but at the same time might move us into some different ground.
You start doing things in the 3rd season like bringing in people from the past or trying to put David Banner into situations that were verboten in the first 2 seasons. You try to find new ways to peel the onion that was David Banner's life. There was always, because he was a mystery man, there was always something new to discover about him. So you try to plumb those kinds of ideas and see if you can keep the show relevant and vibrant.
There were basically 2 kinds of Hulk episodes. One was the episode where Bix was on the way to try to find somebody who might cure him and got involved with people that he met on the road. I had made Dr. David Banner a doctor to begin with so that as a physician he would have entree into various people's lives. The other type of Hulk episode was where he was at a particular place where he was involved with someone who was trying to heal him in one way or another. where he investigated various possible cures for the condition that he had.
What about the X-ray?
We have to wait a few seconds till the serum starts working.
We never thought of it as a comic book. The word was never mentioned. We were constrained by having him turn green twice an episode, but that was it.
The show was about a man with a condition that was out of his control. We used the word duality a lot. The duality of a brilliant doctor scientist who has the worst kind of a monkey on his back. It's not drug addiction. It's not alcoholism. It was all about David's inner demon.
We were the only show on the air at that time that was basically an anthology. Most shows in that period were franchise shows. They were cop shows, they were medical shows, they were lawyer shows. But we had the ability to take an everyman, a human being, and put him in any situation.
Even if it was something as simple as putting out a fire, the people he met had these issues, had these problems.
And that gave us such freedom as writers to really explore every aspect of not only human society, but the human psyche.
So those kinds of things kept it interesting. I think it kept the show a surprise. Even if you didn't like it, it still allowed you not to know what to expect the next time you saw it.
It's interesting because the whole raison d'etre for the series was trying to end the series. You know, that here was a man who was seeking to find a way to end the curse.
We made it, David.
Not quite.
There was a funny thing that happened during season 3, and that was that this British fellow came over from England, where apparently he couldn't get much work, and convinced Universal to hire him to oversee production. He said he could save them millions and millions of dollars. Universal bought into his proposal, and they hired him.
At that time, Universal had something like 20 shows going or 18 TV shows going at the time, so, we were just one of many, but we happened to be a very successful one. And we were not an inexpensive show to do.
This British fellow began calling all the producers on the lot. He called me and said, listen, Kenny, from now on you have to produce The Incredible Hulk exactly for the license fee, exactly for what CBS is paying us per hour for the show. The Hulk budget was around $600,000 or $700,000, and I said, okay, no problem. He said, oh, that's great. And I said, now, are you going to call CBS or am I to tell them that there'll only be one Hulk out per show instead of 2? He said, oh, no, you have to do exactly the same show. And I said, can't be done.
We never did a show with one Hulk out, and I think he took the stance, if you want one Hulk out, why don't we not have any, and let's just walk away from it.
He said, well, no, you must do it. I said, I can't. It physically can't be done. He said, well, then are you saying you won't? I said, I'm saying I can't do it. He said, well, then you're suspended. I said, okay. All of the producers I discovered on the lot were going through this exact same circumstance, and pretty soon the English guy went back to England, and we went on doing the shows the way we'd always done them, and everybody was happy.
Kenny was very, very cost-conscious, as well as being creatively aware and not compromising what he had started with.
There's a wonderful photo of Bix and me that was taken on the set. That was the very first day that Bix had ever had the white eyes in. We put them in to test to see how they would look. And I saw him walking down the hall toward me with those white eyes in. That was the key moment when I really knew that we really had something, because seeing Bill Bixby with that altered persona, I knew was just going to reach out and grab an audience by the throat and not let go of them. The demographics were interesting. Our largest audience was adult women, and then adult men, and then teens, and lastly, kids. And it wasn't because I set out to pander to a female audience. It was just, that's the way we wrote the show.
I have to be honest, for my very first job, I was way too excited to think about things like demographics. I really was. I was writing for me. I was writing what I wanted to see. If I were going to, watch this show, what stories did I want to see? That's what drove me.
Sure, the young kids sometimes would tune in to see the big green guy crash through the wall, but what happened was very quickly the adults in the household saw, wait a minute, there's something else going on here. This is a real drama. This is a little morality play. This is a character that I want to know more about and be involved with. We were also not in a great time period. Friday nights and Saturday nights are notoriously the dumping ground for television shows. It's very hard to get an audience because so many people go out on Friday and Saturday night. But we managed to find the audience and to hang on to them in that time period. That was also in the days of the 8 o'clock hour being the family hour. In spite of the fact that the creature never hit anybody, it was still the violent show because, Louis was picking people up and throwing them or pulling the rug out or slinging them aside or something. And so there was a lot of property damage going on. So I specifically said, we got to be a 9 o'clock show. I don't want to try to have to fight the rules of the 8 o'clock family hour. I mean, nowadays at 8 o'clock you can put on eviscerations and nobody cares, But in spite of that, we did very well at 9, and it was a good time period.
Because of the nature of the show, which was David Banner moves from town to town, we didn't have a permanent set.
A lot of the locations we had were, in small towns, forests or countryside.
A lot of stuff at Vasquez Rocks, which is out in, I think, Santa Clarita, where it would look like scrub desert. We'd go to downtown LA, we'd shoot in alleys, we'd shoot in the back lot as well.
We would constantly walk around the back lot at Universal trying to find sets that we could steal. Trying to find sets that somebody had just used for a movie or another show where we could write a scene to fit into those sets. And my producer friend Jim Perriott and later Nick Correa and production designer Chuck Davis and I spent many, many hours scouring the stages in the back lot at Universal, just finding places we could write scenes into so that we wouldn't have to build them because we didn't have a whole lot of money.
What was the most fun was we used to have the trams go by. They would wave and Lou would wave back. That was always fun for them to see the Hulk. That was a kick.
We stopped using the back lot because of the trams. The tour was getting very, very popular.
Lou Wasserman would not stop the tourist tram. We would say it's costing us time, it's costing us money. He said, I don't care. I'll shut the whole place down and just make it a tourist lot, which is practically what he's done. I mean, the back lot at Universal is now one big amusement park.
Guest stars were not that important as much as, yeah, if we could get a big name, fine, but it was like, who would be best for the role? And the person playing opposite Bill, whoever it might be, male or female, he was very into who was going to play opposite him.
Jack Colvin had been a contract player at Universal, working under contract on a lot of the Universal shows, and when he was suggested to me, I said, that sounds like a great idea, let's do that. I don't think I even read anybody for it.
He was an interesting guy. He was the ultimate professional. He would show up, he knew his lines, he knew what was expected of him, he didn't ask much.
I took him for granted because I always knew he would know his lines, he would be there for wardrobe fittings, he would never be late. He was the consummate professional.
I think he recognized that he had a really good job. I mean, he was the only regular on the show. Bixby was the lead and Lou is the Hulk and Jack, and he was delighted. We loved writing for him. He was a real actor. He loved that part. He really gave it life. After the show was over, he was very involved with his theater group. People loved him as a teacher, and he passed away a few years ago. He was quite beloved by the actors that he mentored.
Lou was already cast when I came on the show, but I think he felt very grateful that he had this, job, and then on top of it, to be recognized the way he was.
It was an opportunity for Louis as an actor to do some different things. We began exploring the Hulk as a character who could have moments as he'd come out of the anger when he was just sort of this simple character that people could interact with in a whole different way. We also finally gave Lou a speaking role playing a bodybuilder on the beach in Santa Monica.
Carl.
You just get here?
Old man yelling at you again?
Small lunch crowd.
It was so incredible to watch the bravery of this man who had learned to speak by reading lips. And so but he transcended that. It was more than just that technical accomplishment, because he also became an actor as well.
This isn't a suicide, this is an execution. The power of the creature has gone beyond the courts. I must be the judge and the jury.
I was very anxious to cast exactly the right person in the leading role. I needed someone who would bring an adult following to it, who was a serious actor, and who would not be thought of as being in something that was anything other than first class. And Bill Bixby was my first and only choice. We sent him the script. His agent gave it to him. Bill said, "What, are you crazy? I'm not going to read anything called The Hulk." And his agent said, "Read it." And Bix read it and called me the next day and came over and said, "Is this what we're going to do?" I mean, Bill was always very intense, right in your face all the time. Oh. And he says, "Yeah, are we really going to do this? Is it going to be this drama? Is it going to be like this excitement, this real human stuff?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Not going to be all comic booky." I said, No. Bix says, "This is what I want to do." And he said, "Will you stay with it for as long as I stay with it?" And I agreed to be part of the show as long as he was part of the show. And indeed, we were pals from then on.
Bill Bixby is the only actor I can think of who could have pulled it off. And I think a lot of it, besides his talent, was his credibility with the audience. They knew that he wasn't going to take them somewhere that would make them foolish.
I know an actor in a series knows his character better than a visiting director. But at the same time, the director has his vision. And Bill was always very receptive to that, you know? So the directors did not have the problem that sometimes they have on a show where the actor will say, "It's my show." It wasn't that way with Bill Bixby.
And I remember our very first meeting with him. We went into his motorhome to get his notes on the script that we'd written. And so we sat down and he said, "You know, on Courtship, I used to send writers crying from the room." And we went, "Oh no, we're in for it." But he loved us. I really think he was very fond of both Jill and I. And there were times we wanted to kill each other, but it was a valiant fight.
You couldn't BS the man. The show's running long, we can cut this scene. You're not cutting that scene. That scene tells the audience this about me, and it's going to stay.
He wouldn't say it's not good. He never insulted us that way. But he would say, "This could be better. This doesn't make sense. This doesn't track for my character. What am I feeling here? What am I supposed to, what can you give me on the page that I can translate onto the screen?" So he was very good that way. And sometimes we'd get annoyed and like, he's making us work harder. But he was right, ultimately. He kept that point of view.
I wanted to hit him over the head at the moment, but he made a writer out of me.
He really believed in the show, worked very, very hard, and purely from a production standpoint, made very little demands.
He was an interesting man and very smart and almost too smart. It affected his life, in so many ways that were troubling. And I had a great deal of compassion for the pain he lived in and for, some of the tragedies that struck his life, and trying to cope with them on a public stage. It's a very difficult thing.
Bix had gone through a very, very difficult divorce from Brenda Benet. So there was a lot of angst going on, personal angst. They had had such antagonism toward each other during the divorce times. It was funny, you could see the Hulk coming out of Bix, this anger that he felt toward Brenda during the divorce was very much on his sleeve, and you could really feel it.
Bill wanted to, it's okay if I say this, right, Bix? Wanted a show so his son could see that his mom and dad, even though they were going through a divorce, could get along. So he wanted us to write a show for Brenda Benet. And I came up with The Psychic, which was the first show that I wrote on my own, and was about a woman who could read minds and was thinking about suicide because a young boy had died that she couldn't save.
Season 4 came the real tragedy when Bix's 6-year-old son, Christopher, died unexpectedly.
And then Brenda killed herself out of guilt, and that one was such a glaring bizarre set of circumstances that everything else pales in memory.
Goodbye, David.
You be good to yourself.
It was interesting because after the death of Christopher and then the death of Brenda, that anger, of course, was sort of dissipated. And yet still, Bix was such a consummate actor that he could always go to wherever he needed to get to give you the performance that you needed. He would laugh to me sometimes and say, which eye do you want me to cry out of? You want the right eye, you want the left eye? Because Bix was able to do that. But ultimately, it all came from a wellspring of talent that was deep within him that really showed itself all the way through the series.